In the 41st millennium, there are 10,000 ways for an empire to die, but only one has ever torn the galaxy itself in half. This is the story of what happens when a son raises his hand against his father, when loyalty becomes the rarest currency in existence, and when the very foundations of reality crack under the weight of betrayal. Picture, if you will, the greatest military force ever assembled by human hands. 20 Space Marine legions, each numbering in the tens of thousands, led by demigod Primarchs who could shatter mountains with their bare fists. These were the Emperor's chosen sons, gene-forged perfection, wrapped in adamantium and ceramite, wielding weapons that could crack planets. They had conquered the galaxy in his name, brought order to 1,000,000 worlds, and stood as humanity's ultimate shield against the darkness between the stars. But even gods can fall. The first crack in perfection's facade begins not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with doubt. A single question whispered in the dark corners of a Primarch's mind. Why does Father keep secrets from us? It's such a small thing, really. Sons have questioned fathers since the dawn of time, but when the son in question commands 100,000 post-human warriors and possesses the power to level cities, doubt becomes something far more dangerous. The Primarch, let's call him by his chosen name now, for his birth name died the day he turned. Horus Lupercal stands upon the bridge of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Around him, the 16th Legion continues its great crusade, bringing imperial truth to the far reaches of space. His warriors look upon him with absolute devotion. And why shouldn't they? He is their gene father, their perfect template, the Warmaster appointed by the Emperor himself to lead this grand endeavor. If you crave more tales from the Dark Millennium, hit that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who support the channel, and you'll want to witness what unfolds when perfection begins to rot from within. The seeds of catastrophe are already planted, though none can see them yet. In the depths of the warp, ancient powers older than human civilization watch and wait. They've been patient for millennia, but now they sense opportunity. A crack in the armor, a moment of weakness in the Emperor's greatest creation. The Chaos Gods lean forward on their thrones of bone and madness and begin to whisper. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you must understand what makes a Primarch's betrayal so devastating. These aren't merely powerful warriors. They are living symbols of humanity's destiny among the stars. Each legion follows not just the tactical genius of their Primarch, but their very genetic template runs through the veins of every battle brother. When a Primarch falls, he doesn't fall alone. He takes his sons with him, and his sons number in the hundreds of thousands. The tragedy begins with victory. Horus has just concluded another successful compliance, bringing yet another human world back into the Imperial fold. The celebrations echo through the fleet as his warriors clean their bolters and sharpen their chainswords. Everything appears perfect on the surface, but perfection, as the Emperor well knows, is the most dangerous lie of all. The wound comes from Davin, a feral world where primitive humans worship powers they don't understand. What should have been a simple compliance turns into something far more sinister when Horus falls to a blade blessed by the ruinous powers. As he lies dying, yes, even a Primarch can die. His most trusted sons make a desperate choice that will damn the galaxy. They take him to the Serpent Lodge. The Temple of the Serpent rises from Davin's moon like a cancerous growth, its walls carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Here, in chambers that exist partially outside normal spacetime. The Lodge's adepts practice rituals older than human memory. They promise healing, but healing in the warp always comes with a price that isn't mentioned until after the contract is signed in blood. Horus descends into fever dreams where reality becomes negotiable. In these visions, he sees truths that the Emperor never shared, or perhaps truths twisted just enough to become lies. He witnesses his father not as the benevolent guide of humanity, but as a tyrant who plans to ascend to godhood while his sons are discarded like broken tools. He sees the imperial truth revealed as the imperial lie, designed to keep humanity ignorant of the powers that truly rule the galaxy. Most damning of all, he sees his own future forgotten, his legion disbanded, his achievements credited to lesser men while he fades into obscurity. The Chaos Gods show him a universe where his loyalty is rewarded with abandonment, where his father's love was always conditional, always political. But these aren't mere nightmares. They're recruitment videos, crafted by beings who have spent 60 million years perfecting the art of corruption. Every vision contains just enough truth to make the lies palatable. Yes, the Emperor keeps secrets. Yes, he plans to transcend humanity. Yes, the Primarchs were created as tools. But the context, the necessity, the greater purpose, all of that gets lost in the whispers of entities whose very existence is antithetical to order. The Lodge's adepts work their healing rituals, while Erebus, first chaplain of the Wordbearers, whispers poison into Horus's ear. This is the moment of infection, when doubt crystallizes into resentment, when questions become accusations. The fever breaks and Horus awakens, but something fundamental has changed. The perfect son looks upon his father's Imperium with new eyes, and what he sees there is tyranny dressed as necessity. The transformation isn't immediate or obvious. Horus doesn't suddenly sprout horns or start sacrificing his own warriors to the dark gods. The corruption of a Primarch is a masterwork of subtlety. Each step so small that those closest to him rationalize away the changes. His tactical briefings become slightly more ruthless. His treatment of non-compliant worlds grows harsher. His inner circle notices he spends more time in private meditation. But isn't contemplation a virtue in a military commander? What they don't know is that he's no longer meditating alone. The Chaos Gods don't appear as horned demons or tentacled monstrosities. Not yet. They come as advisors, as philosophical mentors, as the voices of reason in an unreasonable galaxy. Khorne whispers about the nobility of honorable combat. Tzeentch speaks of knowledge that could save countless lives. Nurgle offers acceptance of the universe's natural cycles. Slaanesh promises the perfection that has always been just out of reach. Each conversation plants another seed of doubt, another reason why the Emperor's way might not be the only way, or even the right way. The beautiful poison of the ruinous powers is that they don't ask for worship immediately. They simply offer alternative perspectives, different approaches, seemingly reasonable questions about unreasonable policies. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other Primarchs begin receiving similar visits. Fulgrim encounters a blade that sings with alien beauty. Angron's rage deepens as the butcher's nails dig ever deeper into his skull. Magnus delves further into forbidden lore, convinced that knowledge itself can never be evil. Mortarion's hatred of tyrants finds new focus on the greatest tyrant of all. The Emperor, locked in his secret project beneath the Imperial Palace, doesn't see the web of corruption spreading through his most trusted sons. He's too focused on the webway, on his plan to free humanity from the warp forever, to notice that the warp has already begun claiming his greatest achievements. The corruption spreads like a virus through the Legion's command structure, but it doesn't announce itself with mutations or obvious heretical symbols. Instead, it manifests as warrior lodges, secret societies within the Astartes ranks that seem harmless on the surface. After all, what's wrong with battle brothers gathering to discuss philosophy and tactics, away from the rigid hierarchy of their command structure? Everything, as it turns out. The lodges begin in the Lunar Wolves, Horus's own legion, but they metastasize rapidly through the other legions. Captain Gavial Loken first encounters one of these gatherings on the world of 6319, where he's invited to join a circle of his brothers as they debate the nature of truth and loyalty. The meeting takes place in the bowels of a captured fortress, lit by flickering lumen strips that cast dancing shadows on ancient stone. What Loken witnesses seems innocent enough. Astartes warriors, still bearing the grime and glory of recent victory, discussing the philosophical implications of their great crusade. But there's something unsettling about the way they speak of the Emperor, a subtle shift from reverence to questioning. They don't openly criticize their gene father, but they ask uncomfortable questions. Why does he forbid the study of certain technologies? Why are some forms of knowledge declared too dangerous for even his sons to possess? Why does he keep secrets from those who bleed and die in his name? The lodge meetings become more frequent, more secretive. Loyalist officers find themselves excluded from certain discussions, certain planning sessions. The chain of command begins to fragment, as brothers who once shared everything suddenly develop private agendas. Trust, that most precious currency in the legions, starts to degrade. In the depths of these gatherings, new philosophies take root. The imperial truth, that cold doctrine of rationality and atheism, gives way to something far more seductive. The promise of real power, of knowledge beyond the Emperor's restrictive teachings. The lodge members begin to speak of the warp not as a treacherous realm to be avoided, but as a source of strength waiting to be tapped. They discuss entities that exist beyond the material universe, beings of vast wisdom who offer guidance to those brave enough to listen. Erebus moves through these lodges like a plague carrier, spreading infection wherever he goes. His words are honeyed poison, each argument carefully crafted to exploit the psychological weaknesses of post-human warriors. To the proud, he speaks of the Emperor's ingratitude. To the ambitious, he offers paths to greater power. To the philosophical, he provides complex justifications for simple betrayal. The most insidious aspect of the lodge system is how it perverts the very loyalty that defines the Space Marines. These warriors were created to be absolutely faithful to their Primarch and their Emperor, but now that loyalty becomes a weapon turned against the throne. If Horus believes the Emperor has betrayed them, then loyalty demands they follow Horus into heresy. If their gene father questions the imperial truth, then questioning becomes a form of devotion. Captain Tarek Torgadon watches his brothers change with growing unease. Conversations that once centered on tactical doctrine now drift toward discussions of hidden knowledge and suppressed truths. Battle brothers who once shared everything begin keeping secrets. The easy camaraderie that defined the Lunar Wolves starts to fragment along invisible lines, those who belong to the lodges and those who don't. The transformation accelerates when the lodges begin conducting rituals. Not the obvious ceremonies of chaos worship that will come later, but seemingly innocent traditions borrowed from the worlds they've conquered. A blood oath here, a moment of meditation there. harmless symbols carved into personal equipment. Each small step seems insignificant, but together they create a pathway leading away from the Emperor's light. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale of corruption chills your soul, because the worst is yet to come. The Wordbearers Legion provides the ideological framework for what's happening. Their Primarch, Lorgar, has already walked this path from faith to doubt to heretical enlightenment. His chaplains spread through the other legions like missionaries, carrying new gospels that speak of gods who actually answer prayers, who grant real power to their faithful servants. Unlike the distant emperor, these entities offer immediate rewards for devotion. The first test of this new loyalty comes at Istvan III, a world whose name will echo through 10,000 years of imperial history as the place where brother first raised bolter against brother in earnest. Here, Horus reveals the true extent of his transformation, not through speeches or manifestos, but through an act of genocide so complete, so coldly calculated, that it shatters any illusion of honorable rebellion. The Warmaster has chosen his sides carefully. Within each of the 4 legions assembled at Istvan III, the Sons of Horus, Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and World Eaters, he has identified those who remain stubbornly loyal to the Emperor. These warriors, many of them veterans who have bled across 100 worlds in the Great Crusade, represent a problem that requires permanent solution. They will never accept his new vision. They will never kneel before the powers he now serves, so they must die. Captain Gaviel Loken leads the first wave assault on Istvan III's capital, unaware that he's been marked for death by his own gene-father. Around him, the cream of the Legion's loyalist elements advance through the city's burning districts, their bolters barking disciplined fire patterns as they clear each structure with textbook precision. These are the best of the best, veterans of the Great Crusade whose loyalty to the Emperor burns as bright as their weapon muzzle flares. They have no idea they're walking into their own funeral. The virus bombs fall without warning, dozens of them, deployed from the fleet above with surgical precision to ensure maximum coverage of the assault zones. The Life Eater virus doesn't kill cleanly or quickly. It devours organic matter from the inside out, reducing proud Astartes warriors to screaming chemical soup in minutes. Even their enhanced physiology, designed to survive the worst the galaxy can offer, proves useless against this ultimate betrayal. Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children barely escapes the initial bombardment, his warning to the surface coming too late for most. He watches through the static-filled vox as his battle brothers die in agony, their final transmissions cut short by liquefying vocal cords. The lucky ones manage to seal their armor's environmental systems in time, buying themselves precious minutes to find shelter or higher ground. The unlucky ones simply cease to exist. Ancient Rylanor, the venerable dreadnought of the Emperor's Children, survives the viral apocalypse through sheer mechanical stubbornness. His sarcophagus tomb protects the dying hero within as he witnesses the aftermath. A world scoured clean of life, its very atmosphere turned toxic by the viral payload. Through his enhanced sensors, he detects movement in the ruins. Loyalist survivors, scattered and few, trying to comprehend what their own Primarchs have done to them. The virus attack is only the beginning. As the toxic atmosphere reaches critical saturation, the traitor fleets begin the second phase, incendiary bombardment, designed to ignite the viral soup and complete the sterilization. Firestorms sweep across continents as the very air becomes fuel. The few survivors, those who found sealed bunkers or managed to jury-rig their life support systems, huddle in the darkness, while their world burns above them. But Horus has made a critical error in his calculations. He assumed that betrayal would be clean, that even his most loyal sons would accept death with stoic resignation when it came from his hand. Instead, the survivors do what Space Marines do best. They adapt, they endure, and they fight back with everything they have left. Captain Loken, his armor scarred by viral burns and his faith shattered by his Genefather's treachery, begins gathering the scattered loyalists. They number in the hundreds now instead of tens of thousands, but they are still Astartes. They still remember their oaths to terror, and they are very, very angry. The battle for the Coral City becomes legend, a handful of loyalists making their final stand against traitor forces that outnumber them 1,000 to 1. They fight not for victory, which is impossible, but for vindication. Every bolt round they fire, every chainsword thrust they land, every defiant Vox transmission they broadcast carries the same message. The Emperor's light still burns, even here, in this place of ultimate darkness. The irony isn't lost on the survivors. They've been condemned as the disloyal ones by Primarchs who've sworn themselves to alien gods. They've been marked for extermination by sons who claim to fight for humanity's future while serving powers that view humanity as cattle. The galaxy convulses like a living thing as word of the Istvan III massacre spreads through the astropathic networks. What began as whispered rumors in distant sectors becomes screaming certainty as fragmentary Vox transmissions and refugee testimonies paint a picture too horrific to believe, yet too detailed to dismiss. The unthinkable has happened. Space Marine has turned upon Space Marine, and the very foundations of the Imperium tremble beneath the weight of this revelation. In the throne room of terror, the Emperor's fury manifests as psychic storms that shatter crystal windows and send even his custodian guards stumbling. He had felt the deaths, tens of thousands of his gene sons screaming out their final moments across the void. The betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound ever could, for these were not just his warriors, but his children, fashioned from his own genetic template and raised to be humanity's salvation. The immediate response is chaos. Across 1 million worlds, Imperial commanders struggle to determine which of their allies can still be trusted. Astropaths collapse at their stations as psychic screams echo through the warp. Trade routes that have remained stable for centuries suddenly become killing fields as uncertainty breeds paranoia, and paranoia breeds violence. Rogel Dawn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, becomes the bearer of impossible news. His face, normally a mask of stoic determination, shows cracks of barely contained anguish as he reports to his father what the surviving loyalists have transmitted. 4 entire legions have turned traitor. Not individual companies or chapters, but entire gene lineages numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The scale of the betrayal is so vast that the human mind struggles to process it. But the Emperor's response reveals the true scope of the catastrophe. He doesn't react with surprise or denial. He reacts with the terrible certainty of someone whose worst fears have finally materialized. Deep in the Imperial Palace's most secure vaults, contingency plans that were never meant to see activation begin moving with clockwork precision. The Terran defense networks come online. The custodian guard shifts from ceremonial protection to wartime readiness. Most ominously, construction begins on the fortress walls that will transform the throne world into humanity's final citadel. Halfway across the galaxy, other Primarchs make their own terrible choices. Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children allows an alien blade to whisper corruption into his perfect soul. Angron of the World Eaters embraces the rage that the Butcher's nails have been feeding him for decades. Mortarion of the Death Guard turns his hatred of tyrants toward the greatest tyrant of all. Perturabo of the Iron Warriors finally gives voice to the resentment that has festered in his heart since childhood. Magnus the Red presents the most tragic case of all. His attempts to warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery backfire catastrophically when his psychic message shatters the Webway project, humanity's best hope for escaping dependence on warp travel. In a single moment of desperate loyalty, Magnus dooms his own legion to censure and ensures that the Emperor will be trapped on the Golden Throne for millennia to come. The loyal Primarchs respond with the desperate fury of sons watching their family tear itself apart. Leman Russ of the Space Wolves howls for the blood of traitors. Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels begins a campaign of extermination against any who show signs of corruption. Rabute Gilliman of the Ultramarines attempts to maintain some semblance of order as entire sectors burn. Each loyal son becomes a pillar, holding up a crumbling edifice, but even they begin to realize that they may not be enough. The strategic implications unfold like a slow-motion apocalypse. The Great Crusade, humanity's greatest achievement, grinds to a halt as half the Imperial military turns its weapons inward. Supply lines that have fed 1 million worlds suddenly become arteries pumping poison into the body of the Imperium. Forge worlds that have produced weapons for 2 centuries must choose between competing claims of legitimacy. The tension builds. Subscribe to witness more tales from the Dark Millennium, because what comes next will shake the very pillars of reality. The Mechanicum of Mars faces its own schism, as the Warmaster's promises of forbidden technology appeal to those who have always chafed under the Emperor's restrictions on artificial intelligence and Xenos science. Forge worlds begin choosing sides based on their interpretation of ancient treaties and their assessment of who offers the better path to knowledge. The contagion of civil war spreads faster than any virus, consuming entire star systems in weeks as the galaxy learns a terrible truth. When demigods go to war, mortals die in numbers that beggar comprehension. Whole sectors that have known peace for generations suddenly find themselves torn between competing loyalties, each choice carrying the weight of extinction. On Talon, the Iron Warriors unleash virus bombs across the entire planetary surface, transforming a verdant garden world into a toxic wasteland, simply because its population declared for the Emperor. The survivors, driven into deep bunkers and armored vehicles, fight the largest tank battle in human history across irradiated deserts, where nothing will grow for 10,000 years. Millions of Imperial Guard die in this single engagement, their sacrifice buying nothing more than time for other worlds to prepare their defenses. The Forge world of Lucius faces a more insidious corruption. Fulgrim's Emperor's children arrive not as conquerors but as liberators, promising the tech adepts freedom to pursue perfection without the Emperor's restrictive dogmas. The planet's ruling Fabricator General listens to their honeyed words about transcending the flesh and achieving true mechanical purity. By the time he realizes that the Emperor's children define perfection very differently than the Mechanicum, half his tech priests have already undergone transformations that would make demons weep. Calth burns under Lorgar's orchestrated betrayal, as the word-bearers turn a routine muster into a massacre that nearly destroys Rabute Gilliman's Ultramarines. The attack comes during a moment of perfect trust. The 2 legions assembled for what should have been a joint operation against Xenos threats. Instead, Gilliman watches his sons die in nuclear fire as his brother's ships rain death from orbit. The Primarch of the Ultramarines survives, but his faith in the fundamental order of the universe dies that day. The Shadow Crusade carves a bloody path through Ultramar as the Word-bearers and World Eaters compete to see who can inflict greater atrocities. Worlds that have known only prosperity under Guilliman's rule become charnel houses, where the very laws of physics bend under the weight of accumulated suffering. Angron grows stronger with each slaughter, feeding on the psychic screams of billions until he transcends mortality entirely, becoming something that was never meant to exist in real space. But the horror isn't limited to military targets. The traitors have learned that the fastest way to cripple the Imperium is to shatter its faith, and faith dies hardest when innocence burns brightest. Shrine worlds become priority targets, not for their strategic value, but for the despair their destruction spreads through the Imperial citizenry. When the Emperor's children desecrate the Cathedral of Illumination on Laer, they broadcast the act across dozens of systems, forcing millions to watch as their most sacred sites become playgrounds for abominations. The warp storms that follow this cascade of betrayal and slaughter make interstellar travel a nightmare. Ships that enter the Imperium emerge decades later, if they emerge at all, with crews aged to dust or transformed into things that barely remember being human. The Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic lighthouse that guides Imperial ships through the warp, begins flickering as the Master of Mankind divides his attention between the growing crisis and his secret project beneath the palace. Entire systems find themselves cut off from Imperial authority for months at a time. Without central coordination, local commanders make desperate alliances or catastrophic mistakes. Some worlds declare independence, hoping to wait out the storm. Others throw in their lot with whoever arrives first, regardless of their allegiance. Many simply fortify themselves and prepare to die fighting, because the alternative, surrender to the traitor forces, has proven to be worse than death. The loyal forces fight with the desperation of the cornered. Jagatai Khan's white scars become a spectral force haunting the outer systems, striking at traitor supply lines before vanishing into the void. Korax's Raven Guard, nearly destroyed at Istvan V, rebuild themselves through guerrilla warfare that turns every shadow into a potential threat. Vulcan salamanders excel at defensive actions that buy time for civilian evacuations, often at the cost of their own lives. The economic implications cascade through the Imperium like a slow poison. Forge worlds that have supplied weapons for centuries suddenly find their output contested or cut off entirely. Agricultural worlds that have fed dozens of systems become battlegrounds where the very soil is poisoned by viral weapons and chemical bombardments. Trade routes that have remained stable for millennia become hunting grounds for raiders, wearing the colors of both sides. On Terra, the Emperor watches through 1,000 psychic eyes as his great work crumbles. Each world that falls to chaos, each population center that burns, each act of betrayal by those he trusted most carves another wound in his perfect design for humanity's future.
The Imperium itself recoils from the scale of violence unleashing across the galaxy, but recoiling is not the same as retreating. Instead, the warp feeds on the psychic screams of dying billions, growing fat on betrayal and despair, until the barriers between real space and the warp are broken. Realm of souls begin to weaken throughout the galaxy. What was once humanity's highway between the stars becomes a howling maelstrom where nightmares take physical form and madness has weight and substance. Navigator houses that have guided Imperial ships for millennia find their bloodline gifts failing them as the currents of the warp shift into impossible configurations. The Paternova of House Belisarius, the most gifted navigator of his generation, goes permanently blind, trying to chart a course through what his mutant third eye perceives as screaming geometries that eat light itself. His final log entry, recorded in Gothic script that bleeds actual blood, simply reads, "The eye is opening everywhere." Astropaths across the Imperium begin suffering what the Scholastica Psychana terms cascade burnout syndrome. These sanctioned psychers, whose minds have been trained since childhood to touch the warp safely, find themselves overwhelmed by psychic feedback from the Civil War's mounting atrocities. On Valhalla, the entire astropathic choir spontaneously combusts during a routine message transmission, their immolated corpses spelling out words in a language that predates human speech. The few who survive report the same nightmare. Something vast and hungry, circling terror like a predator. The phenomenon spreads to unsanctioned psychers as well. Across 1,000,000 worlds, humans who have hidden their psychic gifts for decades suddenly manifest powers that tear holes in reality. A frightened child on Necromunda accidentally summons a lesser demon of Tzeentch during a tantrum. A factory worker on Armageddon develops the ability to see through time, but only backwards, and only the moments of greatest suffering. Most tragically, these manifestations often occur in population centers where the results cascade into mass hysteria and witch hunts. The warp storms themselves take on characteristics that violate everything the Imperium thought it knew about immaterium physics. Ships entering what should be calm sectors emerge with their crews speaking in tongues, their chronometers showing impossible dates, their hulls bearing scorch marks in the shape of symbols that cause madness in those who look upon them too long. The Imperial Truth, a Mars-class battlecruiser, enters a minor warp eddy near Segmentum Solar and emerges 17 years later with its crew aged backwards into children who remember fighting wars that haven't happened yet. On worlds where the warp touches real space directly, geography becomes negotiable. The hive city of Tertius on Mordian suddenly finds its upper spires extending into a dimension where gravity flows upward and the dead walk among the living. Citizens report streets that lead to their own childhoods, doors that open onto alien worlds, and mirrors that reflect not their faces but their sins given physical form. The planetary governor's final transmission before contact is lost forever describes buildings that dream and dreams that have learned to build. The Emperor's own psychic might, stretched across the galaxy to maintain the Astronomicon, begins to show strain in ways that terrify even his custodian guard. The Golden Throne's archaeotech systems work over time to channel his consciousness, but the machine spirits that operate the ancient devices report fluctuations in his psychic output that correspond directly to the traitor force's worst atrocities. When Angron achieves demonhood through the slaughter on Nuceria, every light in the palace dims for 17 minutes, and the throne itself bleeds actual blood through microscopic stress fractures. The loyal Primarchs find their own psychic gifts amplified by the warp's agitation. Sanguinius of the Blood Angels begins experiencing prophetic visions of such clarity and horror that he stops sleeping entirely, afraid of what he might see in his dreams. Jaghatai Khan reports that his precognitive abilities now extend months into the future, but only show him scenes of death and betrayal. Most disturbing of all, Korax begins manifesting the ability to step partially outside of reality itself, becoming a living shadow that can walk through walls and appear in multiple locations simultaneously. Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes in these warp-touched times? The Chaos Gods, fed by this unprecedented feast of emotion and carnage, begin to stir from their eternal game in ways that reality was never meant to accommodate. Khorne's realm expands as his brass fortress grows new towers built from the skulls of space marines. Tzeentch's impossible library gains new wings containing books that write themselves with the blood of prophets. Nurgle's garden blooms with new diseases, crafted specifically to corrupt the Emperor's genetic gifts. Slaanesh, youngest of the four, grows stronger with each act of brother killing brother, feeding on the exquisite agony of betrayed trust. As the galaxy burns and the warp seethes with unnatural hunger, Terra transforms into something its inhabitants have never seen, a fortress world preparing for the ultimate siege. The Emperor, his golden form now confined more often to the arcane machinery beneath the palace, issues commands that reshape the throne world's very geography. What was once humanity's shining capital becomes a layered, defensive nightmare designed to extract the highest possible price from any who would dare assault it. The Himalaysian mountains themselves become weapons. Macro-cannon emplacements carved into peaks that once held ancient monasteries now boast firepower capable of cracking battleship armor. The palace's outer defenses extend for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, each layer designed by Rogel Dorn's obsessive genius for fortification. Tank traps the size of city blocks channel potential attackers into killing fields where overlapping fire zones ensure nothing larger than a single warrior can advance without being reduced to atomic paste. Dorn works without sleep, his augmetic implants interfacing directly with cogitator networks that coordinate millions of construction servitors. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists has found his perfect purpose, creating the ultimate fortress in defense of his father. His calculations show that even if the traitors bring their entire force to bear, the palace should hold for months, perhaps even years. But privately, in moments when he thinks no one is watching, Dorn allows himself to acknowledge that should and will are very different concepts when facing brothers who have embraced the power of gods. The civilian population of Terra faces impossible choices. Some flee to distant colonies, hoping to escape the coming storm. Others volunteer for the defense forces, accepting augmetic implants and combat training that transforms peaceful citizens into desperate soldiers. The majority, however, simply try to continue their lives as normally as possible, while the sky above them fills with defensive platforms and the ground beneath their feet vibrates with the construction of bunker complexes that extend into the planet's core. The Custodian Guard, the Emperor's 10,000 immortal protectors, emerge from their hidden sanctums and patrol the palace grounds in full war gear for the first time in living memory. These golden giants, each one a masterwork of genetic engineering that makes even space marines look crude, represent the Emperor's final line of defense. Their guardian spears hum with power fields that can cut through any armor ever forged, and their eyes burn with the absolute certainty that they will die before allowing harm to reach their master. The silent sisterhood takes to the field alongside them, their null fields creating dead zones in the warp that offer some protection against the psychic horrors that increasingly manifest around strong emotions. These women have given up their voices, their names, and their humanity in service to the Emperor's vision, and now they prepare to give their lives as well. Their flamer units practice coordinated sweeps through the palace's infinite corridors, burning out any trace of corruption before it can take root. The fortress moon of Luna undergoes its own transformation as the Selenar gene cults work around the clock to produce more space marines for the loyal legions. The gene seed reserves that were meant to support the Great Crusade for centuries are consumed in months as desperate attempts are made to replace the losses from Istvan and the spreading civil war. But quantity cannot replace the quality of veterans lost, and everyone knows that these fresh recruits, no matter how willing, lack the experience to face traitor Astartes who have fought for 2 centuries. Advanced warning systems stretch their sensor networks across the Sol system and beyond. Listening posts hidden in asteroid fields and comet swarms broadcast constant updates on fleet movements throughout the local sector. The message is always the same. The enemy comes, but not yet. Not yet. The waiting becomes a form of torture as defenders prepare for battles that may be months or years in the future. The Emperor himself becomes increasingly remote, spending more time connected to the arcane mechanisms beneath the palace. When he does appear, his presence burns brighter than ever before, as if he is drawing power from some vast reservoir to fuel the coming confrontation. The custodian guard report that he sometimes speaks to empty air in languages that predate human civilization, conducting conversations with entities that exist only in his perception. Whether these are strategic discussions with loyal forces beyond the warp or something far more disturbing, none dare ask. The greatest tragedy of Terra's transformation is how it reveals the Emperor's contingency planning. Hidden weapon systems emerge from structures that appear to be purely ceremonial. Art galleries become armories. Gardens become training grounds for urban warfare. Every beautiful facade conceals instruments of death, suggesting that the master of mankind always knew this day might come. The palace was never just a seat of government. It was always a trap waiting to be sprung. The traitor fleet arrives at the edge of the Sol system like a plague of locusts, their hulls blackened by warp fire, and their banners declaring allegiance to powers that have no names in human tongues. For the first time in 30,000 years, Terra's skies darken with the shadows of hostile warships, their numbers so vast that even the planet's mighty orbital defense networks seem insignificant by comparison. The Warmaster has gathered the full strength of 9 space marine legions, countless mortal auxiliaries, and war engines that dwarf the greatest titans ever built by the Mechanicum. From the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Horus surveys the system he once helped conquer in his father's name. But the being that wears the Warmaster's face is no longer entirely human. The Chaos. Gods have been generous with their gifts, transforming him into something that can stand toe-to-toe with the Emperor, while retaining enough of his original brilliance to coordinate the most complex military campaign in galactic history. His tactical genius, now enhanced by demonic insight, sees through every one of Dawn's carefully prepared defenses. The opening moves of the siege unfold with terrifying precision. The Luna gene cults fall within hours as word-bearer assault teams, guided by insider knowledge from corrupted tech adepts, disable the moon's defensive shields and allow demon engines to manifest directly within the sealed laboratories. The screams of the Selenar cults echo across the void as centuries of genetic lore burn in promethium fires that rage cold and blue. The orbital defense platforms, massive fortress stations bristling with weapons capable of cracking continents, become the first major casualties of the traitor fleet's overwhelming firepower. The station designated Throne Ward 7 holds out for 17 hours against concentrated bombardment from 3 battle barges before its magazine explosions light up Terra's night sky like a second sun. Captain General Valdor watches from the palace ramparts as humanity's greatest defensive works crumble under the weight of their creators' own weapons turned against them. The Iron Warriors, masters of siege warfare, begin their methodical dismantling of Dawn's fortifications. Perturabo's calculations show him every weakness in his brother's designs, the blind spots in sensor coverage, the vulnerabilities in overlapping fire patterns, the structural stress points where concentrated bombardment will cause cascading failures. His siege guns, some of them large enough to house entire companies of warriors, begin the systematic reduction of the outer defensive rings. But the true horror of the siege lies not in its military aspects, but in its supernatural dimensions. As the traitor forces establish their positions around Terra, the warp itself begins to intrude into real space. Demon engines materialized from pure malice stock between the conventional tanks and artillery pieces. Possessed space marines whose flesh runs like wax march alongside their unaltered brothers, their battle cries spoken in tongues that cause madness in those who hear them. The Emperor's children, led by a Fulgrim who has transcended physical form entirely, begin their assault on the Lion's Gate spaceport with an orchestra of screaming weapons. Their sonic cannons don't simply kill, they transform death into a form of art, creating patterns of destruction so beautiful that some defenders stop fighting just to watch their own dismemberment. The few survivors of these attacks report that the traitors seemed more interested in the aesthetics of murder than in tactical objectives. The World Eaters pour through the first breach in the outer walls like a red tide of pure rage. Angron, now a prince of Khorne whose very presence causes reality to bleed, leads his sons in charges that defy all tactical logic. They advance directly into overlapping fire from Imperial Fist's defensive positions, absorbing casualties that would break any normal force, because pain and death only fuel their supernatural fury. Entire companies of loyalist defenders find themselves overwhelmed not by superior tactics, but by enemies who become stronger with every wound they receive. The Death Guard's approach proves more insidious. Mortarian's sons deploy viral weapons that make the Istvan bombardment seem restrained by comparison. These new plagues don't simply kill. They transform their victims into carriers of corruption that spreads through contact with the living. Entire defensive sectors fall not to assault, but to pandemic as Imperial Guard regiments collapse from within, their dying screams becoming hymns of praise to the plague god. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale of ultimate betrayal chills your soul. Because we're approaching the moment when gods walk among mortals. The Loyalist response reveals the true character of those who remain faithful. Sanguinius, of the Blood Angels, leads a desperate counterattack against the spaceport, his golden wings casting shadows of hope across the battlefield as he carves through traitor ranks with sword and fury. But even the most angelic of the Primarchs shows signs of the strain. His prophetic visions now show him only one possible future, and in that future, he dies. The palace walls, designed to withstand the fury of gods, begin to crack under bombardment that has continued without pause for 55 days. Each breach that appears in Dawn's perfect fortifications represents not just structural failure, but the collapse of certainties that have anchored Imperial civilization for 2 centuries. The golden spires that once caught Terra's sunlight now stand broken like the ribs of some vast corpse, and through their shattered gaps pour enemies wearing faces that were once trusted beyond all measure. The Eternity Gate, the final barrier between the outer defenses and the inner palace itself, becomes the focal point of fighting so intense that the stones beneath the combatants' feet begin to melt from sustained weapons fire. Here, the last of the loyalist titans make their stand. God machines whose machine spirits scream hymns of defiance, even as demon engines tear apart their armor plating with claws forged from crystallized hatred. The Legio Ignatum's Dies Irae falls with its weapons still firing, its plasma reactor's death light temporarily blinding both friend and foe as 10,000 years of faithful service ends in atomic fire. Imperial fists. Terminators hold the breach points with the stubborn fatalism that defines their legion. These warriors, encased in tactical dreadnought armor that has survived the worst the galaxy can offer, stand immobile as mountains while traitor forces break against them like waves against cliffs. Captain Sigismund, the Emperor's champion, duels with traitor champions at the foot of the Eternity Gate, his blade carving through ceramite and corrupted flesh with equal ease. But even he cannot be everywhere, and for every champion he kills, 2 more take their place. The civilian population that remains on Terra witnesses horrors that redefine their understanding of reality. In the hab blocks surrounding the palace, families huddle in reinforced shelters while the sounds of superhuman warfare thunder overhead. Children who have never known anything but the Emperor's peace watch through armor-glass windows as angels and demons battle in the sky, leaving contrails of fire and blood across the dawn. Many simply lose their minds, their sanity sacrificed to preserve the illusion that such things are possible to survive. The Custodian Guard begin taking the field in numbers not seen since the Unification Wars. These golden champions, each one worth a dozen Space Marines in combat, fight with weapons that have tasted the blood of kings and monsters. Their guardian spears trace arcs of lightning through traitor formations, while their storm shields turn aside blows that could shatter tank armor. But even they are not infinite, and each fallen custodian represents a loss that cannot be replaced in any reasonable time frame. The Emperor's psychic presence becomes increasingly erratic as he divides his attention between the siege and the failing webway project beneath the palace. Those few who still have access to him report that he sometimes doesn't recognize loyal servants who have served for decades. His consciousness stretched across too many critical tasks to maintain normal awareness. During these episodes, the Astronomicon flickers, causing ships throughout the galaxy to become lost in the warp or emerge in sectors they never intended to visit. The breach comes at the Saturnine Gate, where Perturabo's methodical siege work finally overcomes Dorn's defensive genius. The Iron Warriors pour through the gap like a tide of iron and spite, their hazard-striped armor splattered with the blood of Imperial defenders. Behind them come the word-bearers, chanting litanies that cause the very air to thicken with psychic malice. The combination of overwhelming firepower and supernatural corruption proves too much for even the best-prepared defenses. But the palace's fall reveals one final surprise. Dorn's real masterwork was never the walls themselves, but the layered kill zones within them. Every corridor becomes a death trap. Every room conceals automated defenses that have been waiting centuries for activation. The traitors find themselves advancing through a labyrinth where the architecture itself fights against them, where servo skulls armed with melter charges dive at them from hidden alcoves, where the very floors can electrify or collapse on command. The fighting degenerates into the kind of close-quarters hell that turns heroes into killers and killers into monsters. Chainswords shriek against power armor in corridors too narrow for proper maneuvering. Bolt pistols bark at point-blank range, their mass-reactive rounds detonating inside bodies that were designed to survive anything the galaxy could offer. Brothers who once shared the same gene seed die with their hands around each other's throats, their final words curses in languages they learned in childhood. The Warmaster himself finally sets foot on Terra for the first time since his corruption, his massive form wreathed in power that makes the air itself burn. Where he walks, marble floors crack and golden statues weep tears of blood. His presence is so overwhelming that normal humans collapse unconscious within 50 meters, their minds unable to process what they're seeing. Even space marines find themselves struggling to maintain coherent thought in his vicinity, as if his very existence challenges the fundamental laws that govern reality. The Emperor's response to his son's arrival shakes the palace to its foundations. Deep beneath the throne room, ancient machinery screams to life as the master of mankind prepares to face what he helped create. The confrontation that 10,000 years of history has been building toward draws near, and both sides know that the galaxy itself hangs in the balance. The throne room of the Imperial Palace, built to accommodate ceremonies with thousands of attendees, suddenly feels impossibly small, as father and son face each other across 10,000 years of shattered dreams. The Emperor rises from the golden throne, his form blazing with psychic fire that burns away shadows and reveals truth in its most terrible forms. Across from him, Horus stands wreathed in the power of gods who have never known mercy, his once noble features twisted into something that hurts to perceive directly. The silence between them stretches for eternal seconds. Here are the two greatest beings ever to draw breath, creator and creation, hope and despair made manifest. The Emperor sees in his son's face the echo of the laughing child who once ran through the halls of the palace, who called him father with absolute trust and love. Horus sees in the Emperor's golden radiance the tyrant who created him as a tool, who built an empire on lies and called it truth, who would sacrifice anyone, even his own sons, for a vision of perfection that never included room for dissent. When words finally come, they carry the weight of civilizations. "My son," the Emperor speaks, his voice harmonizing with itself across multiple dimensions. "You were the best of them all, my greatest achievement, the one I trusted to carry my dream to the stars." Horus laughs, and the sound makes reality flinch. "Your dream, not mine. Never mine. You made me to be your tool, your weapon, your perfect general, but never your son, never your equal, never anything more than a means to your glorious end." The conversation that follows encompasses accusations that have been building for centuries. The Emperor's secrecy about the Webway project, his plans for the Primarchs after the Crusades' end, his refusal to acknowledge the Chaos Gods even as they corrupted his children. Horus speaks of abandonment, of being left to face the galaxy's horrors while his father pursued secret projects. The Emperor responds with necessity, with the cold logic of someone who has seen all possible futures and chosen the least catastrophic path. but words cannot bridge the gulf that has opened between them. The Chaos Gods have fed Horus truths wrapped in lies until he can no longer distinguish between them. The Emperor's own psychic might, stretched across the galaxy in the failing webway, cannot spare the attention needed to reach his son's corrupted soul. They are trapped in their roles now, the tyrant and the rebel, the father and the prodigal son, the god and the demon prince. The first blow comes without warning, faster than thought, as Horus strikes with Worldbreaker, his massive war mace wreathed in energies that should not exist in real space. The Emperor parries with the sword of the Emperor, a blade forged from his own psychic essence, and the collision sends shockwaves that crack the throne room's adamantine walls. The custodian guard who witnessed this moment will speak of it in whispers for the rest of their immortal lives. Two gods of war unleashing power that makes their previous battles seem like children's games. They fight through the palace's most sacred chambers, their combat devastating priceless artifacts and ancient technologies that can never be replaced. The Emperor's psychic lightning meets Horus's demonic might in explosions that temporarily tear holes between dimensions. Through these rifts, the watching Chaos Gods pour their attention into real space, their alien psyches adding weight and malice to every blow their champion strikes. The duel reveals the true extent of Horus's corruption. His attacks come not just from his physical form, but from the warp itself, as demonic entities manifest to strike at the Emperor from impossible angles. His very presence corrupts the palace's systems. Statues weep blood, servo skulls malfunction and attack their handlers, and the lights themselves dim as if ashamed to illuminate such violation of sacred space. But the Emperor's power, even divided as it is, proves equal to the challenge. His sword carves through demonic manifestations like they are made of shadow and regret. His psychic might burns away corruption wherever it touches, leaving only purified matter behind. Each gesture he makes rewrites the local laws of physics, asserting his will over reality itself through sheer force of divine consciousness. The turning point comes when Horus, driven by demon-whispered fury, strikes at his father's throat with Worldbreaker. The Emperor catches the blow on his armored gauntlet, and for a moment they stand frozen, matched strength against strength, will against will. In that instant of perfect balance, something breaks in both of them, not physically, but spiritually, as father and son acknowledge what they have become to each other. "I still love you," the Emperor whispers, his words cutting through the warps, howling like golden knives. Horus's response tears both their hearts. "I know. That's what makes this necessary." The final moments of their duel stretch like eternity, each heartbeat a small epoch in which the fate of humanity hangs suspended between salvation and damnation. The Emperor, his golden armor cracked and bleeding light through a dozen wounds, finally accepts the truth that has been growing in his heart since Istvan. His son is lost, not just corrupted or misguided, but fundamentally changed into something that can never be redeemed. The Chaos Gods have not simply influenced Horus. They have consumed his soul and worn his body like a suit of living armor. The realization brings not rage, but a sorrow so profound that it manifests as physical weight, pressing down on the throne room until even the adamantine floor begins to crack. The Emperor has sacrificed everything for his vision of humanity's future. His mortal life, his capacity for simple happiness, his relationships with those he loves most. Now he must sacrifice the last piece of his heart, his hope for his wayward son. The killing blow comes not as an attack, but as an act of love. The Emperor drops his guard, allowing Horus to strike him down with Worldbreaker, the war mace crushing divine ribs and sending golden ichor spattering across the chamber walls. As he falls, mortally wounded but not yet dead, the master of mankind finally unleashes the full extent of his psychic might, not in anger, but in mercy. The wave of pure psychic energy that erupts from the Emperor's dying form doesn't simply kill Horus's physical body. It reaches into the warp itself and tears the Chaos God's hooks from his soul, burning away 10,000 years of accumulated corruption in a single instant of purifying fire. For just a moment, one perfect, terrible moment, the real Horus returns, his eyes clearing as he recognizes what he has done. "Father," he whispers, the word carrying all the love and regret that the Chaos Gods had tried to burn out of him. "What have I done? What you had to do, my son," the Emperor replies, his voice already growing faint as his life bleeds out across the golden tiles. "What they made you do, I forgive you." Horus dies with tears of gratitude streaming down his face, his soul finally free, but his body too damaged by demonic possession to survive its liberation. The Warmaster, the greatest of the Primarchs, the most beloved son, collapses beside his father's broken form as his heart simply stops beating. The irony is not lost on either of them. In the end, it took the Emperor's death to save his son's soul. But the Emperor is not finished. Even as his physical form fails, his consciousness expands, touching every loyal soul fighting throughout the palace. The custodian guard feel his presence like warm sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The remaining Imperial fists find their bolters firing truer, their chainswords cutting deeper. The mortal defenders, terrified civilians pressed into service, suddenly fight with the courage of heroes as they feel their god's approval burning in their hearts. The psychic shockwave of the Emperor's sacrifice ripples outward from Terra, racing through the warp faster than light itself. On distant battlefields throughout the galaxy, the forces of chaos suddenly find themselves weakened as their connection to the dark gods falters. Demon engines collapse into inert metal. Possessed space marines scream as alien entities are torn from their flesh. The great tide of corruption that has been drowning the Imperium in darkness suddenly finds itself facing a golden dawn. The traitor forces on Terra feel it most of all. Without Horus to coordinate their efforts, without the Chaos Gods' direct intervention to fuel their supernatural abilities, the massive assault begins to fragment. Primarchs, who had followed the Warmaster out of loyalty rather than corruption, few though they were, suddenly find themselves questioning what they're fighting for. The word-bearers, most devoted to the ruinous powers, fight on with fanatical determination, but even they seem diminished without their patron deity's constant whispers. Rogel Dawn finds his father's body in the ruins of the throne room, the master of mankind's form so badly damaged that only his incredible will keeps his consciousness anchored to the physical realm. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists, who has never shown weakness in the presence of others, falls to his knees and weeps golden tears that sizzle when they hit the floor. "Father," Dawn whispers, his voice breaking with grief, "what do we do now?" The Emperor's response is barely audible, his words more felt than heard. "The throne." Get me to the throne. The breach in the webway must be sealed, or Terra dies anyway. The procession that carries the Emperor's dying form to the Golden Throne moves through corridors still echoing with the sounds of battle. But now those sounds grow fainter with each step. The remaining custodian guard form an honor escort around their master's broken body, their golden armor dulled by grief and their spears held in ceremonial mourning position. Behind them walks Rogal Dorn, the Emperor's most loyal son, his face a mask of stone that cannot quite hide the agony burning in his eyes. The Golden Throne itself has been waiting for this moment, its ancient machine spirit programmed with contingencies that the Emperor hoped would never be necessary. As they approach the massive psychic amplification device, its neural interfaces writhe like living things, eager to make contact with divine consciousness. The archaeotech systems that comprise its core, technology that predates human civilization and operates on principles that even the Mechanicum considers miraculous, hum with anticipation. The process of connecting the Emperor to the throne requires precision that would challenge the greatest tech adepts. But there is no time for careful calibration. The psychic breach in the Imperial webway grows wider with each passing moment, threatening to turn Terra itself into a demon world where the laws of physics become mere suggestions. Already, the lower levels of the palace echo with inhuman howls as entities of pure malice pour through the dimensional rift. Malkador, the Sigillite, the Emperor's oldest friend and most trusted advisor, makes the ultimate sacrifice as he temporarily takes the Emperor's place on the throne. The ancient Psyker's withered form crumbles to dust within hours as the throne's massive psychic load burns through his life force like paper in a flame. But those precious hours are enough for the tech adepts to complete the neural interface connections that will bind the Emperor to the device forever. The moment of connection transforms both the Emperor and the throne into something new and terrible. His consciousness expands across dimensions as the machine amplifies his psychic might beyond anything previously imagined. The breach in the webway slams shut with a sound like reality itself, screaming, sealing away the demon hordes but trapping the Emperor's awareness in a constant struggle to maintain the barrier. He becomes simultaneously the most powerful being in the galaxy and the most imprisoned, his infinite might focused on a single, endless task. The Golden Throne's life support systems engage, replacing the Emperor's failing biological functions with mechanical alternatives that turn him into something between man and machine. His physical form begins to desiccate as the throne draws upon his life force to power its operations. But his consciousness remains intact, trapped within a prison of his own design, but still capable of reaching across the void to guide humanity's destiny. The immediate effect ripples across Terra as the Emperor's psychic presence, now amplified beyond measure, burns away the last pockets of demonic corruption. Traitor forces still fighting in the palace's outer rings suddenly find themselves facing not just mortal defenders, but the awakened wrath of a dying god. Chaos. Space Marines who have battled for days without rest collapse as their patron deities withdraw their support, unable to maintain their presence in the face of such overwhelming psychic fire. The Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that guides Imperial ships through the warp, blazes brighter than ever before as it draws power from the Emperor's enhanced consciousness. Throughout the galaxy, navigator houses report that the Emperor's light has become so intense that it burns to look upon directly, but also so steady that travel times between systems drop dramatically. The cost of this improvement is measured in the Emperor's agony, as he must now consciously maintain the beacon every moment of every day for eternity. The surviving traitor Primarchs feel their father's transformation as a physical blow. Those few who retain some connection to their original loyalty, Perturabo, Alpharius, even the demon-corrupted Fulgrim, experience moments of crushing regret as they realize what their rebellion has cost. The Emperor's love for his sons, amplified through the Golden Throne, reaches across the galaxy to touch their hearts one final time, offering forgiveness even as he condemns them to exile. But the throne's activation creates problems that will plague the Imperium for millennia to come. The Emperor's physical voice, once capable of inspiring billions with a single speech, is reduced to the barest whisper that only the most sensitive psykers can detect. His ability to make direct decisions becomes limited as more and more of his consciousness is devoted to maintaining the barriers between real space and the warp. The being who once walked among his people and led them personally into battle becomes a distant, almost mythical figure whose will must be interpreted by others. The Imperium finds itself without its guiding hand at the moment when it needs leadership most. The great vision of the imperial truth, that humanity would transcend superstition and rule the galaxy through reason and science, dies with the Emperor's entombment. In its place rises something far more primitive and far more dangerous. The cult of the Emperor, a religion built around the worship of the very being who once declared that gods did not exist. The galaxy that emerges from the Horus Heresy is a fundamentally different place than the one that entered it, transformed not just by war, but by the loss of hope itself. The Great Crusade, humanity's bold expansion into the stars, becomes a half-remembered dream as the Imperium turns inward, building walls instead of bridges, choosing survival over growth. What was once an empire of progress becomes a fortress of fear, and what was once humanity's golden age becomes the first chapter of its long, slow decline into darkness. The immediate aftermath brings changes that will define the next 10 millennia. The Space Marine legions, proved too dangerous in their original form, are broken apart into smaller chapters of 1,000 warriors each. This Codex Astartes reform, championed by Robut Guilliman, ensures that no single commander will ever again wield the power that Horus brought to bear against Terra. But it also fragments the Emperor's greatest weapons at the moment when they are needed most, scattering the survivors of loyal legions across a galaxy that seethes with threats. The surviving Primarchs, traumatized by their father's fate and their brother's betrayal, gradually disappear from Imperial history. Some die in final battles against their corrupted siblings. Others simply vanish into the void, pursuing personal quests or consumed by grief too profound for mortal understanding. Rogal Dorn throws himself into ever more dangerous missions until he finally finds the death he seeks. Corax retreats into the shadows and is never seen again. Vulcan disappears on a journey to find artifacts that might heal the Emperor. One by one, the demigods who once brought order to the galaxy abandon the civilization they helped create. The institutional changes prove even more devastating than the personal losses. The imperial truth, the secular philosophy that once guided humanity's expansion, is officially abandoned as the cult of the Emperor spreads through every level of society. The man who once declared that gods were humanity's greatest enemy becomes the focus of the most fanatical religious devotion in galactic history. Temples rise where laboratories once stood. Prayers replace scientific inquiry. Faith becomes more valued than knowledge, and questioning becomes heresy punishable by death. The mechanicum of Mars, already fractured by the schism that saw Forge worlds choose sides during the Civil War, emerges from the conflict as the Adeptus Mechanicus, a techno-religious organization more concerned with preserving ancient knowledge than advancing human understanding. Innovation becomes suspect, creativity becomes dangerous, and the great leap forward in human technology that marked the Dark Age becomes impossible to repeat. The galaxy fills with weapons and machines that no one fully understands, maintained through ritual and prayer rather than comprehension. The warp itself grows more turbulent as the Chaos Gods, fed by the heresy's violence and the Emperor's eternal suffering, gain permanent footholds in real space. Storm fronts that once lasted days now persist for centuries. Entire sectors become cut off from Imperial contact for generations at a time. The reliable interstellar travel that made the Great Crusade possible becomes a nightmare lottery where ships disappear without trace and crews emerge aged decades or transformed into things that barely remember being human. The Eye of Terror, the great warp storm that swallows the Cadian Gate, becomes a permanent scar on reality where the traitor legions establish their own twisted empires. From within this realm of madness, they launch black crusades against the Imperium, massive invasions that serve no strategic purpose beyond spreading suffering and chaos. The war that began at Istvan III never truly ends, but becomes a generational conflict that consumes resources and lives in quantities that beggar imagination. Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes in these dark times of endless war? The human cost grows beyond calculation as the Imperium adopts policies that would have horrified the Emperor who created it. Planets are declared exterminatus and burned to ash for crimes as minor as harboring unsanctioned psychers. Entire populations are enslaved to feed the war machine that protects them. Children are taken from their families to serve institutions that will use them up like ammunition. The civilization that once promised to free humanity from superstition and oppression becomes the galaxy's greatest source of both. The irony compounds as the decades turn to centuries and the centuries turn to millennia. The Emperor's sacrifice, intended to preserve human civilization, instead locks it into a pattern of perpetual decline. His psychic might, focused entirely on maintaining the barriers against chaos, cannot spare the attention needed to guide humanity toward the future he envisioned. The Golden Throne becomes not just his prison, but humanity's, trapping the entire species in a cycle of violence and ignorance that grows worse with each passing generation. The worst tragedy of all lies in what might have been. The Webway project, abandoned when Magnus's warning shattered its foundations, represented humanity's best hope for transcending its dependence on warp travel. The imperial truth, discarded for the comforting lies of religious faith, could have led to a renaissance of human knowledge and capability. The unity between the Primarchs, shattered by chaos corruption, might have guided humanity to heights that dwarf even the Dark Age of technology. Instead, the galaxy settles into the grim routine that will define the next 10,000 years. Endless war, grinding oppression, and the slow but inexorable decay of everything the Emperor once dreamed of achieving. 10 millennia pass like a fever dream of blood and darkness, each century bringing new wars, new heresies, new reasons for humanity to hate and fear itself. The galaxy of the 41st millennium bears only passing resemblance to the realm of hope that the Emperor once envisioned, transformed into a charnel house where 1,000,000 souls die screaming every day, and that is considered a quiet Tuesday. The Imperium has become the very thing the Emperor sought to prevent. A theocratic empire built on ignorance, sustained by brutality, and dedicated to the worship of powers it does not understand. The Long War continues without pause as the traitor legions, now calling themselves the heretic Astartes, launch Black Crusade after Black Crusade from their fortress worlds in the Eye of Terror. Abaddon the Despoiler, once Horus's most trusted lieutenant, has taken up his fallen Primarch's mantle and leads these apocalyptic invasions with the single-minded determination of one who has seen gods die and civilizations burn. Each crusade brings him closer to Terra, each failure teaching him new lessons about the Imperium's weaknesses, each victory feeding the Chaos gods who whisper strategies in his dreams. The Cadian Gate, that crucial choke point between the Eye of Terror and the rest of the galaxy, has become the Imperium's most vital battleground. For 10,000 years, the fortress world of Cadia has stood as humanity's bulwark against chaos, its people born into a military culture so absolute that children learn to field-strip laser guns before they can properly walk. The planet's entire civilization exists for one purpose: to hold the line against the Long War, no matter the cost in blood or sanity. The demon Primarchs, ascended to godhood through their patron's dark gifts, occasionally manifest in real space to lead their legions personally. When Angron walks the battlefields of Armageddon, the very ground bleeds, and the air fills with the screams of every warrior who has ever died in anger. When Magnus the Red appears on Prospero's ruins, reality bends around his presence until up becomes down and yesterday becomes tomorrow. When Mortarion brings his death guard to bear against hive worlds, entire continents die of plagues that make the Black Death seem like a minor inconvenience. But the Imperium's response to these endless threats reveals how completely it has betrayed the Emperor's original vision. The Inquisition, an organization that would have horrified the rationalist who created the imperial truth, burns entire worlds on suspicion of corruption. The Adeptus Mechanicus hoards technology like a miser hoards gold, more concerned with preserving ancient rituals than advancing human knowledge. The Ecclesiarchy preaches that suffering is holy, that ignorance is blessed, and that questioning any aspect of imperial doctrine is tantamount to heresy. The Space Marine chapters, heirs to the Emperor's greatest warriors, fight with the desperate fury of men who know they cannot win but refuse to surrender. They are 10,000 heroes holding back 10 million nightmares, superhuman champions facing threats that grow stronger with every passing year. The Blood Angels battle against the Black Rage that turns their noble warriors into berserkers. The Dark Angels hunt their fallen brothers across the galaxy while keeping secrets that could shatter their reputation. The Ultramarines try to maintain some semblance of the Emperor's original ideals while watching the Imperium slide deeper into barbarism with each generation. The common citizens of the Imperium live lives that would have been unimaginable to their ancestors during the dark age of technology. They toil in hive cities where the sun never penetrates the lower levels, where gang wars claim more lives than some planetary invasions, where the average lifespan hovers around 31 years if you're lucky enough to avoid the press gangs, the food riots, and the periodic purges. They worship an emperor they've never seen, fear Xenos they've never encountered, and die for causes they don't understand. Yet somehow, impossibly, the Imperium endures. Not because of its strength, but because of its sheer, bloody-minded refusal to admit defeat. Every world that falls to chaos is eventually reclaimed, no matter how many millions die in the process. Every heresy is eventually crushed, no matter how long it takes or how much of the Imperium burns in the fighting. Every Black Crusade is eventually turned back, though the victories come at costs that grow higher with each iteration. The Emperor himself remains trapped on the Golden Throne, his consciousness spread so thin across the galaxy that he can barely maintain the barriers that keep Terra from becoming a demon world. 10,000 psychers die every day to feed his spiritual fire, their souls consumed like candles to keep his light burning. The Astronomicon flickers more often now, its beam wavering as the master of mankind's attention fragments under the weight of 10 millennia's accumulated suffering. But in the darkness between the stars, new threats stir. The Tyrannid hive fleets approach from beyond the galactic rim, drawn by the psychic beacon of the Emperor's light like moths to a flame. The Necrons awaken from their 60-million-year slumber to reclaim a galaxy they consider rightfully theirs. The Tau Empire expands with the naive optimism of a young race that hasn't yet learned why the galaxy fears hope. The tragedy transcends the personal pain of father betrayed by son, extending into the cosmic horror of an entire species trapped in a cycle of decline from which there may be no escape. Every prayer offered to the Emperor by faithful billions is also a scream of agony from the dying god bound to the Golden Throne. Every victory against chaos comes at a cost that makes the next victory harder to achieve. Every day of survival is purchased with sacrifices that make survival itself questionable. Yet perhaps this is the most human response of all to the galaxy's infinite cruelties. In the face of gods who view mortal suffering as entertainment, against alien empires that see humanity as vermin to be exterminated, surrounded by technologies from dead civilizations that operate beyond comprehension, the Imperium chooses to exist through sheer stubborn defiance. It may be ignorant, brutal, and utterly antithetical to everything its founder believed in, but it refuses to surrender to the darkness that surrounds it. The children of Terra still look to the stars, though now they see only war. They still dream of tomorrow, though their dreams are filled with nightmares. They still serve something greater than themselves, though that service has become a form of spiritual cannibalism that devours the very souls it claims to save. In becoming everything the Emperor fought against, they have somehow managed to preserve the one thing he valued most: humanity's refusal to simply lie down and die. The ultimate irony may be that Horus, in his moment of final clarity before death, understood this better than anyone. His betrayal was not just personal rebellion against a distant father, but the necessary catalyst for humanity's transformation from a species of dreamers into a race of survivors. The Imperium that emerged from the ashes of his rebellion may be a mockery of the Emperor's vision, but it is also proof of humanity's capacity to endure absolutely anything the universe throws at it. The Emperor's light burns eternal on the Golden Throne, but at what cost? The answer echoes through every prayer whispered in humanity's darkest hour, through every bolter fired in defiance of certain death, through every child born into a galaxy that offers nothing but war and asks for everything in return. The cost is everything: hope, progress, the dream of a better tomorrow, but in paying that price, humanity has purchased something that may be more valuable. The absolute certainty that no matter what fresh horrors emerge from the darkness between the stars, the human race will meet them with loaded weapons and an unbreakable will to survive. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also humanity, bloodied but unbroken, fighting not because victory is possible, but because surrender is unthinkable. And in that endless defiance, perhaps, burns the last ember of the Emperor's true vision, not a galaxy perfected, but a species that refuses to be perfected by anything other than its own stubborn, magnificent refusal to accept defeat. The great game continues, as it always has and always will, but humanity plays by rules written in its own blood and witnessed by the dying light of a god who loved his children too much to let them die easily. The Emperor protects. More stories await.